Hello, fellow Sublime Text fanatics. We are here. We're live. It's tiny skosh late. There's doings transpiring in the immediate vicinity of the front of the complex in which I live, which made it a little bit tricky to finish the evening walk. But we're here. Hello, Ayush. Hello, Pablo. Welcome to tonight's live stream where we will be answering your questions about Sublime Text and Sublime Merge, anything that you might have about how to use it or any questions that you have. And also working a little bit on some content for some upcoming videos on the channel, or one particular video, I should say, because we have a Plugin 101 video course teaching you how to become a package and plugin author in Sublime Text. And one of the things that's missing from that is a video that talks about how to get your package hosted on the package control. And in order to do that, we're going to need a sample package so that we can go live through the entire process from beginning to end. We have a package that is a good candidate for this, but we haven't really touched it in a little while, so we thought we might look at that with an eye towards turning it into an actual package that we could deploy to package control as a part of this video series. So we're going to check into that. You have a question about build systems. I'll tell you what, hang on just a second here. We'll make sure on this alternate monitor here that it thinks everything is handy-dandy. Thus, okay, everything seems to be working good. That's cool. Let's go ahead and do this and we can get into the action. So the question we have is, when would you personally use CMake or Make over Sublime and vice versa? Well, what exactly do you mean by that? Because Make and CMake is about compiling the code, but Sublime is more an editor. So I'm assuming, what do you mean, like, would you use Sublime to try to build it versus doing it inside of a console externally? By way of talking about that, if I push the correct sequence of buttons, this is the C source code, or C++ source code, for a game engine that I was working on quite some time ago. The last time I did anything with it, it was I was just running a 32-bit system. Now it needs to be ported to 64-bit. So problems related to that. So I use Sublime as the editor for things, but when it comes time to build it, I use a build system inside of Sublime. And in this particular case, I'm using a make file for this because the build system name slightly overloaded in this situation that I use and for all of my projects is a make file per se. I don't personally use CMake myself for any project that I work on. The only time I ever use CMake is when I'm compiling code that somebody else wrote. I find it easier to just make the make file myself as opposed to having the third party thing try to figure it out for me, because it almost always gets it wrong in my personal experience. So from this perspective, I use Sublime to edit, and I also have a custom build system inside of this project, which does not need to be custom for a project by any stretch of the imagination. If we were to look at the make build, for example, you might notice that what this looks like and what this looks like are very similar. The only thing that I have different here is that I'm using Terminus in this instead of not. And that's because my build system knows how to display colors. I kind of broke the file by doing that, didn't I? Yeah, that's... Pardon me. There we go. So I have... My build system knows how to display colors, and as a result, it looks weird in not Terminus. And it was easier for me to just set that up. My personal preference though, if we're talking about this, is to try to build directly from my tool of choice. When it comes to actually building software, when it comes to running it, sometimes I would run it from directly inside of Sublime, and sometimes I have a button here, but you can't really see it because it's behind the chat, that will just automatically open a terminal, and I will have a terminal with my application that I use to run it, so I can see the code and I can see that at the same time. Not always. Sometimes I will use a terminal inside of Sublime to do the same thing, but when it comes to building, I like to be able to make some quick changes to code and then immediately hit the key to see what the result is, which in that case ain't gonna fix nothing, because there's some serious issues with stuff. Not only is this going from 32-bit to 64-bit, but also a really ancient version of GCC to the latest version of GCC, so there's all kinds of extra stuff in here that it's telling me about that it never did before. Compile using make to compile. As a noob, when would you use the Sublime build system? Well, I mean, if it wasn't this particular project, I would use the build system that's built directly into Sublime. I may have a sample of that here. No, I think that one would probably also track. Hang on. Let's clean that and build. Yeah. So even in this one, where if we look at the project, edit project, I don't have, oh, I do have a custom build system in here. Huh. Oh, right, because I need to specify a particular thing. All right. This is very specific to me, so take this whole bit with a grain of salt, but I have this very complicated-ish system set up for being able to compile my C, C++, and Objective-C programs that factors away 99% of anything that anybody cares about when they make a make file. This is getting a little bit off the beaten track, but if we were to look at the make file for this particular project, I can say that it's going to be a binary with name main, and that it's supposed to compile this C file, and that's all I have to put in this, and it knows how to do that. This also tells it that it needs to link the core library, and everything else is done for me. Because I have this really complicated build system, and again, I'm calling this a build system. It's an overloaded term. It's the system we use to build software, even outside of Sublime Text. It's a little bit more of a complicated one. It displays color to tell you that things are wrong. For that reason, I have specialized build systems just so that I can specify this, don't display any colors. Or in the other one, I just told it to use Terminus because that was easier. Apart from that, if you're using Make, I would use the build system that's directly built into Sublime. You don't even have to do anything special. All you have to do is make sure that the build system is set to automatic or Make, and it will automatically figure out where your Make file is, build your code. You don't need to know anything at all. If you're not using Make, if you're writing C code, for example, and you're not using a Make file, I would recommend using Make, because as it may have been pointed out in some of the videos on build systems, if you look at the build system for a single file C or C++ program, it's going to compile the single file that you give it, or compile it into an executable and then run it, and that's it. And this is great if you're just learning some simple hello world C stuff or writing a quick little thing. If you're doing anything at all that's more complicated than this, that's 2 files or more, or needs to specify a library, this isn't the way to do it. You want to make a dedicated make file or some other external tool, whichever one you're most comfortable with, to build your software in that case. Because otherwise, if this needed a special link line and I added something in here, then every C program is going to link that, whether it's this one or not, which could be a place where project-specific build systems come into play as well. But the important thing to take away is that the build systems that ship with Sublime are, to some degree, meant as a guide to get you rolling before you customize them yourself. Some of them are more complete in that regard. For example, the build system for Python, which is even more enhanced in Sublime Text 4, is pretty much all you need for Python, unless your Python's not on the path or you have very specific needs. For C and C++, you would need something a little bit special. For Java, you definitely need something special. The build system that ships with Sublime for, oh, pardon me for not being able to type, Java build. Notice it's named Java C. All it does is compile a single file. It doesn't do anything else. So if you're doing Java, this is basically just making sure that your syntax in your code is correct. You're going to need to do a lot more external stuff. This is why we say Sublime is incredibly powerful, but it does require you to know how to use the tools that you need to use in order to set it up. If you can craft a command that will do it manually, you can make Sublime do it for you automatically and make your life better. But I would almost always use a build system to compile code. I can't envision any situation that I've come across in the last 5 years where I wasn't using a Sublime build system to build something, except for if I didn't have Sublime. For example, if I was building code on a server, if I was doing something like on this system over here, if I needed to build something, I'd have to use Make there because I don't have Sublime on that system. It's a remote system. I'd also be using VI for that, or Vim. But hopefully that answers your question. They're very, and I mentioned this in the last couple of videos. They're very powerful. It's not complicated to make a build system per se, because it's very simple to set them up. There's just a lot of things you can do with them, which makes it seem fairly complicated. But when it comes right down to it, as we saw in like the last video on this, not this last video, but the week before, it really just comes down to one key in your build that knows how to execute an external command. That's really all you need in a pinch, because you can set the build system manually to whatever you want and just have it execute that tool. My voice feels kind of scratchy tonight. I'm not sure what the deal is with that. And build system stuff is going to be coming back, but somebody asked a question about, or made a comment rather, about the quality of the audio in the how to use a plugin video, and that's one of the first videos that I made, or I guess the second video that I ever made for the channel. So I wanted to bring up the quality for that and pace it a little bit faster, because the original one is like twice as long. But build system stuff is going to be coming back. No problem. Hopefully I didn't get too ridiculously off the track. Now that would apply to C, C++, Java. Java build systems are a lot more complicated. You need something external like Gradle or a Maven and the like. To be fair, as much as I'm a staunch user of Sublime Text, if I was doing anything of any substance with Java, then it wasn't something that was just code that I was compiling that someone else wrote, I may very well use some external tool like NetBeans or something to at least come up with like a Gradle file or whatever before I came back to Sublime. I'd probably be very unhappy about it, but I would totally do that. Pardon me. Got to take another little sip there. As I was saying, the stream started slightly later today because there is unfortunately an apartment fire right across the street from the front gate, and there was like a whole big thing going up there, and I think I might be getting a little bit of smoke coming in too. Is there a Rust build system? There is. It calls Rust C. And there's a couple of extra variants in here. One if you want to build and run. Now let's see. This is coming from the Rust package that comes directly with Sublime Text. So this isn't one I created myself, which makes sense because Rust isn't really a language that I'm super familiar with. But this is an example of a build system that contains multiple variations on a build. This is something that we haven't talked about in the new video series on build systems, although we have talked about it in the older ones. and that is that inside of any build, you can include this variance key and then include one or more additional variations on the build. And inside one of these variants, you can imagine that whatever keys aren't in here, these keys basically will be applied on top of the ones inside of the global. So this has the ability to, by default, just compile a Rust file. If you selected the run variant, then it would try to run the program that you built. And if you choose build and run, then it'll try to compile it and then try to run it. And I would imagine this would have the same problem if you had a multi-program Rust, or multi-file Rust program, rather. Let's see, what window manager am I using? I use XFCE, the cholesterol-free window manager. Pardon me, I should probably do that with the appropriate button. Specifically, I'm using 4.12 of XFCE. There's a slightly newer version. I don't use cargo. Yeah, there could be, like, Rust isn't a language that I'm familiar with per se. Like, I know it exists, but I've never actually used it, so I'm not sure what the tooling is like. There could be some adjustments to be made there. For example, I will get back to the other question in just a second. If we were to look at .NET Sublime build, which is one that I created for working with C# in .NET, then this particular build system uses the .NET tool to be able to build or clean or run interactively. And with that set, of course, when you use the build with command from the menu, tools build with, if there's more than one variation like this, it'll ask you which one you want. So probably you use something similar for that. And do I have Vim key bindings to navigate Sublime without the mouse? I do not use Vim key bindings, although I am and have been a Vim user for over 20 years at this point. It was my main editor for pretty much the entire time up till I used Sublime. I found Sublime Text to replace some other tools that I was using, and I just started using Sublime as my editor for absolutely everything across Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. I still use Vim from time to time when I'm working on servers and the like, but I'm one of those people that prefers to keep Vim key bindings in Vim. So there's still key bindings that I can use to do various things. I tend to use the mouse more in streams than I actually do in practice when I'm using Sublime, because I kind of use it as my way to wave my hands around and talk on the screen and draw attention to things, and then that makes it more natural to use the mouse. But by and large, I would be using the keyboard to do various things, unless I'm not sure what the key binding is. Then I might come to the command palette, and occasionally people ask questions about various things that I don't tend to use. For example, recently in the Sublime Text Discord, somebody asked about whether or not the functionality for duplicate line changed in some fashion, and that's not something that I normally use, so I had to maneuver my way in and assume that this is something that's editing, and it's probably editing lines, and to be able to see what the key actually was for that. So there's a couple of situations where I tend to go to the menu. But even for other things, like for example, if I was going to create a plugin, you could use Tools Developer, a new plugin, but I do that so frequently that I just added that directly to the command palette to make my life a whole lot easier. So by and large, a combination of default key bindings I ship with Sublime, some custom key bindings that I added myself, which would be the user Linux keys in this particular case. Those are from various plugins that I probably helped somebody with at some point, including that one. That one may or may not actually need to be there. And then I just have various other key bindings that I've created for my own use. For example, and I don't even use these that often, but we're talking about build systems. You can specify the build command and tell it exactly what variation of a build to run, or even what build system to run. So in this particular case, I tend to use make files. I have a key binding set so that as long as the make file build is selected, I can press Control-Alt-Shift-K to clean and Control-Alt-Shift-R to run. And that's not something that I've actually done in a while, but that was sort of mimicking other tools that I was using at the time. But by and large, yeah, I use Vim keys only inside of Vim because otherwise I end up pressing escape more than I intended. You can get that sort of action though. Neo-Vintageous is the package that I would recommend if you're looking for that sort of stuff, if you don't already know that. There's a vintage package that ships with Sublime that adds some VI type key bindings, but I think Vintageous is the much more complete system in that particular regard. Okay, so that's that. And we can imagine upcoming items in the build system series are going to go more in depth into some of the things that we can see in this actual build here, such as using file regex and line regex to be able to find and match errors and warnings so that you can navigate to them and so that they can be displayed to you in the editor when you navigate there. Having variations on a build, having the ability to have a different command line argument or a different command specified per platform. So in this particular case on Linux and Mac OS, this is how it would be executed, but on Windows it's executed this way, and so on. Yeah, cool. Like I said, I've never personally used Vintageous. Did I say Vintageous or Neo-Vintageous? Because I believe this one is the newer of the two, if I misspoke there. I'm not entirely sure. This one's definitely more updated than Vintageous is. Drop-in replacement, it integrates with stuff. Let's say I don't personally use it, so the recommendation that I have for this is that literally everybody that I've ever seen that wants to have VI support tends to use this, or they have problems with Vintage and they come and ask about them and someone says you should try Neo-Vintageous and they say, hey, that's cool. This one, Vintageous may actually not even be a package anymore. This may have completely replaced it at this point, or maybe Vintageous is the name of something from another system. But in any case, yeah. This one used to be very good as well, but it hasn't been updated in a while. I think the author has sort of disappeared in an unfortunate kind of way, because I think even this web page no longer actively works. If you follow the yeah, I'm aware. Thank you. If you're aware of the Sublime Text community documentation, you might know that it switched URLs about a year ago, and that was because it was hosted by the same person and all their websites went away. And we don't know what happened to him. We hope all is well, and he just lost access to an account or something. Hard to say. The thing that we're going to be sort of looking at for the rest of this, unless you have more questions, because there is, I always have sort of plans for what I'd like to do during one of these streams, but questions from the chat always take precedence over anything else. So no matter what's going on here, if you have any questions or about anything Sublime Text or Sublime Merge related, feel free to drop them in the chat. Don't worry about derailing anything. Can you easily add a menu command to the command palette? You can indeed. Let's show an example. What is something that is not in the command palette by default? I'm not even entirely sure what would be a good example here. Let's say unfold all. If I did this, all right, I guess that's already in there, so that's probably a bad example. New window. Let's say we wanted to create a new window and we didn't want to go into the menu and choose new window, and we weren't sure what the key would be to actually do that, which is Control-Alt-Shift or Control-Shift-N in this particular case. Here's how you do that. You go into the View menu and choose Show Console, or press Control Backtick if you're familiar with that key binding. That's going to take you down to the console here. And what you can do is say sublime.log commands. If you're in Sublime Text 4, this is all you need to do. If you're in Sublime Text 3, add true in here. Now, anytime you take any action, Sublime will automatically log in the console and tell you what it is. Say, the list of open recent, well, that isn't something that can be done. If we look here, we can see if we pick open recent, this is just a list of files. We can't get at this list per se. We could add reopen closed file like this, and we can see what actually happened there. The command reopen last file was executed, and then a couple of event handlers triggered, but we don't need to worry about that here. And if we chose one of these files, or like this one, for example, you can see what's happening there. So this command is sort of smart enough to know how to do that. So the list of recent files isn't something that you could easily add via the mechanism that we're showing here. For that, you would need some sort of plugin. And I would imagine there's a package for this. I'm not sure offhand what it would be. You'd have to search on package control if you wanted something like that. Something like recently active files, shows and opens recently active files. Probably something similar to that would do it for you. There's also a file history package that I'm aware of, or there used to be, but there may not be anymore. I think the author might have gotten rid of it. Oh, no, there's a space. Another example of something that probably does that particular thing. But say that, and basically the menu items that you can't add to the command palette are anything that shows you an ad hoc list of things. So from file, the list of recent files, this is something that's populated magically in the menu, or under tools build system. All of these build systems are populated magically into the menu because it knows which ones are supposed to be there based on files that exist. And if you look in view syntax, all of the list of syntax definitions, this particular list of items also can't be done this way because it's also a magic menu that isn't hard coded anywhere with a specific command. It's got something in the menu that allows Sublime to know that this is the point where its auto-generated list should be inserted. But for anything else, could be added to the command palette. And to do it, you would basically turn on command logging, which, as I said, you'll use Sublime log commands true, or if you're in Sublime Text 4, you can just do it that way, which will toggle it. If you're in Sublime Text 3, you need to specify true or false to turn it on or off. And you can see that with it on, every action you take gets logged inside of this. This tells you the name of the command. This tells you the arguments that it's taking. And if the command doesn't take any arguments, like left delete, then you don't see that particular part. So let's say we wanted to add something to the command line to the command palette to go up by one line, for example. That would be this. So I'm going to turn off command logging now, just because that's going to make life a little bit easier. And that's what we want to add. What you want to do is create a sublime-commands file inside of your user package. Very easily, the syntax is going to look something like that because it's a list of items, and then the entry has these items. A caption, that is the text, like move up one line. This is what will appear inside of the command palette as the text to execute. Then you need to specify the command, which in this case is move, and then you need to specify args. This may look very familiar because this is how you create a key binding with command and args, but instead of keys, you just specify the caption. And the arguments that we want are by lines, forward, false. So I'll just steal this from here and paste it in. And this is enough to add this to the command palette. You need to save this into your user package or into any package, but usually you would customize your user package. And as we covered in the video just yesterday, you can generally pin this in whatever operating system you use. In the video, I use Windows. Here we can see I've pinned the packages folder to be able to get directly to this location a lot easier. Give this any name that you want, like my custom commands, and the extension has to be Sublime commands, like so. Sometimes you'll see people doing this with default.sublime commands. That's because that's what the default command list items are. I'm not doing that here because I already have one in this file and I don't in this package, and I don't want to cause myself a problem. But if I save that file, now if I go into the command palette and type move, we can see move up one line is in the command palette, and taking that action will do it. And as an added benefit, you also get to see automatically any keys that are bound. So if there's a specific command in a menu that you would like to do something to take an action, again, not to display a list, but to take a specific action, then you could turn on command logging. And the same thing happens for key bindings as well. So if we push the correct keys and turn this back on, and I'm going to do it this way just to toggle it. The key binding for opening the command, the sidebar is Control K, Control B, and pushing that key binding, we see the command. So we could also add that up here in the exact same way. I'm going to turn that off. Now, if you're using an older version of Sublime, then sometimes items that are already in that you invoke from the command palette won't be logged. That's really only an issue if you want to work this problem in reverse. Like for example, say you wanted to, well, we need to find something in here that's not new build system is in the command palette, but it doesn't have a key bound to it. And if you wanted to like add a key for this, and pretending this wasn't in the menu, then you would need to do this a little bit differently. You'd need to use view package file from the command palette, and then this is a list of every file in every package. Sublime-commands will filter the list to only commands files. This allows you to see everything that is contributing commands to the command palette. So various packages like File Manager is a package I use. It does that. Automatic Package Reloader, Terminus, of course it has commands in there. Package Control has commands in there. Origami does. Default is all of the default things in the command palette when you first install it before you do anything else. And as we can see here, I have several in my user package. I have defaults. I have ones for this particular package here. I've worked on a lot of packages and a lot of streams like diskless buffers and having something that can encrypt a buffer. All of these things will be in the command palette, and you can easily just go and look and see exactly what is inside of it. And that kind of dovetails with the topic that we had for. I'm going to delete that particular file because I don't really need that in my command palette. The other thing to point out is that as soon as you save that file, it will become active. Check inside the console. You'll see if there's a problem with the file. Let's see. User default. If there was something wrong with this file, then when you save it, you'll see an error that tells you that there's something wrong with it. And in this case, package dev also assaults your eyes to let you know that something is broken. But the same thing would happen if it was, even a minor problem. It tells you exactly, line 9, position 5 is where things have gone wrong, and the reason for that is there's not a comma at the end of this line. Always something to keep in mind when you modify any of these particular things. I'm not entirely sure what those things actually are, so we're just going to leave those alone. But I said this kind of dovetails with what I was thinking of doing for the stream here, because I have this package in this repository called Scratch Files, which makes it easy to create a simple little Scratch buffer if you're working on something, say a little code snippet. So let's hide the console. Say for example, we want to show off, or we want to look at a little segment of code that someone provided in the forum or something that's JavaScript. Scratch buffer prompt for syntax. The syntax we want is JavaScript. Now this buffer has JavaScript in it as the language. And we can close this with impunity because it's a scratch buffer. But you could also, if you wanted to, save it, and then it'll try to, give you an appropriate extension. It's a handy little thing. I've been using it for 3 or 4 years now because I do so much work helping people in the forum and Stack Overflow and the like. And there's often a little sample of syntax, like I'm not sure what's wrong with this, and sometimes syntax highlighting can be the clue for that. But it's nicer to look at segments of code and actually be able to see them in syntax, and this is an easy way to set this up. And I have been asked a couple of times by people who have come across this repository if I could add this to package control, which I haven't done up to now, but we want to do a video on taking this package and adding it to package control, or any package realistically. But there's a specific set of steps that you take when you've created your plugin and you've decided you want to share it with the world at large via package control. There's various things that you have to do, and you may not be familiar with those. I thought it would be cool to create a video for that because I don't think there's no information on how to add anything to package control except for the documentation for submitting a package, which can be confusing to you if you're not familiar with the underlying process, like all of the things that need to happen in here. So it is described, but there are things about this that confuse people, like how these entries are supposed to look and the like. I thought it would be cool to do a video on that because we have videos on Plugin 101 for doing this sort of thing. And in order to do that, it seemed like the best thing to do would be to actually have a package we want to add to package control. That way I can carry it right up to the last steps where we create a pull request and actually film doing it and not pollute the repository and then just delete the request and say, sorry, I was making a video. That doesn't sit right with me. So I want to have something that we can actually add. This seems like a good candidate for that. And as you can see, the last time that it's actually really been modified was 4 years ago. And a lot of stuff has happened in Sublime since then. So maybe we want to tweak this up a little bit. I'm not entirely sure what our ideas were for that. Oh, sure, surely, yes. These streams are 100% for people asking questions and getting an interactive response, and then secondarily for anything else. The theme that I use personally is, if you mean application theme, is adaptive. Ooh, the smell of that apartment fire is really coming through now. I hope everybody's okay over there. This is the theme that ships directly with Sublime. I have a couple of small modifications to it, but by and large, what you see is exactly what you would get out of the box. Other themes are dark and light. This is... I really like the darkness of particularly the tab bars over what you get with this one, which is a little bit lighter, which is why I still use adaptive as my theme. When it comes to color scheme, this is the default color scheme that ships with Sublime Text. That's what specifies the colors of the contents of files. The theme styles the application as a whole. The color scheme modifies the colors of tabs and will blow your eyes out and the like. Monokai used to be the default. That's what I used to use. Now I use Mariana. And when it comes to key bindings files, like for example, let's reopen that again. The default Linux key map file, this syntax highlighting here, this is coming from a package called package dev. Thusly, this package here is the package that's doing this. Now, as the name suggests, it says tools to ease the creation of snippets, syntax definitions, etc. That might throw you off because you might think, I'm not a package developer, but when you think about it, customizations that you make to Sublime Text like adding a key binding, adding things to the command palette, are exactly the same things that a package author would do if they were creating a package to be shared. You're just doing it inside of your own custom user package. So technically speaking, everybody is a Sublime Text package developer. So this has a lot of features in it. You may or may not really care about any of them, but the fact that things are better syntax highlighted. So for example, out of the box, this is what the syntax highlighting would look like in this file, because this is a JSON file. But we can see all of the different types of items in here. Sublime key map gives us that. Or the same thing would happen when we look at a Sublime build file. For a sample build, there's better syntax highlighting in here for this as well, as opposed to, say, the default, which would look like this. Having this syntax highlighting is extra handy in build systems, which is something that's going to be mentioned in one of the upcoming videos as well. Because if you put a key in here that's not part of a build, it's highlighted differently to tell you that this particular key isn't something that technically will work in a build system. So, yeah. Oh, and I can do this as well, I think. Package dev. I have a video that talks through some of these things as well, which would be that one if you would like to sort of see a run through of some of the other things that it can do for you. If you are a package developer, then you are crazy if you don't have this thing installed, because it will make your life way, way easier in a lot of different ways. But even for the casual user, I would still recommend it. If you watch my videos and you see syntax highlighting in places that you don't generally see it, this would be the reason. I used to mention that in videos, but I don't anymore because it's starting to take a bunch of time, so I just sort of wait in case somebody asks. Man, that is some harsh business. Okay, let's take a look. The way this is written, it will work for people using older versions of Sublime and newer versions of Sublime, because before Sublime Text Build 3.154, the command palette didn't have the ability to have input handlers that allow it to prompt you for input directly in the command palette. And the prime example of that is the arithmetic command, which when you execute it from the command palette lets you type in any sort of arithmetic type thing you like, and it will calculate it and even insert it into a buffer. Or, you know, we could do something like take that number and add 12 to it if we wanted it to be a bigger thing and whatnot. And I have a video on the channel about this as well. So it's smart enough to be able to work one way or the other, but there's been some enhancements to the Sublime API that maybe we should take advantage of here as well. Ashwin, hello, welcome to the stream. How are things going for you today, this fine morning? I have my window open behind the monitor to try to get some cool air in here, but there was a pretty nasty fire across the street, and I think they had it under control about an hour ago, but we're really starting to get some serious smoke over here, and I may need to pause and close the window because of air quality. Well, basically I would imagine that comes down to the actual implementation of the server itself. I'm not sure which one of those is the one that is by Microsoft. Yeah, it seemed like it was, Ashwin. Yeah, when my dog and I were doing our normal nighttime walk. We had to redirect a little bit because the apartment building directly across the street from our front gate had, which as far as we could tell, as people that were watching, or not that I was watching, but people from our apartment complex were over there, had started in one place and spread to two others before they got it under control. It looked like everybody was okay. The entire building was emptied out on the street, and people from my complex were taking them over chairs to sit on for the wait, and taking them like water and snacks and whatnot, because we don't know how long they're going to be out there. So as far as we know, and nobody that I talked to out there saw any ambulances other than the ones that just, automatically show up in response to a call like that, but they didn't see anybody be taken away. So I think hopefully everybody is okay. But yeah. Oh, okay. I can't remember it. I don't use LSP myself, although I need to get more into that because I do have plans to create videos for it. But the developers of the LSP package are in the Sublime Text Discord, and there's a dedicated channel there if you have LSP related questions. I only mention that because I seem to recall there being a discussion about these two items and how one of them was more under active development. I'm not sure if PyLSP is the one. Yeah. Pyrite is from Microsoft. The reason I remember that is because people were talking about how weird it is that the official Python server is made by the Microsoft, and they're normally JavaScript developers or something along those lines. But why it's so slow, that would be down to implementation and how it does stuff, I would imagine. So I'm not sure if they have any plans to do something faster than that. Presumably anybody that's working on something like that, if it's actively being developed, would try to make it as performant as possible. But I don't have any inherent knowledge about that myself, no. Yeah, Pyrite seems to be the one that I think is mostly recommended. That's the one we played with in one of the past streams, right, Ashwin? LSP Pyrite? I don't think I have it installed right now, but when all else fails, use the faster one unless it doesn't have the features that you want. But let's take a look and see. This is taking a while. Ah, they're both in here now. I can't remember if that was the case before. Yeah, LSP Pyrite is provided through Microsoft Pyrite, and this is just a convenience package for the Python language server. Doesn't have quite as much information. That's interesting. Hello, Rockin' Games. Been eyeing the Sublime product suite for a while now and thinking of making it my main C++ CUDA work environment instead of CLine. Do you think I'm going to have a hard time migrating? Well, that depends. Do you know if you're used to using CLion, and I've only used that a little bit. I have a license to an older version, but I never really got too much into it because I didn't realize, that it caters primarily to CMake and not regular make files. And as I covered earlier on in the stream, none of the stuff that we work on at work uses CMake. It all uses our own make system. So it would have required a ton of work for us to be able to use it. So I never actually did anything with it. The two things that you're going to find, maybe three. Let's say there's three things you're going to find if you jump to Sublime from CLion. One is that code intelligence in Sublime is based on lexical analysis of the structure of a file, but it can't necessarily show you things like function signatures unless you install the LSP package, which is something we were just talking about, and then you can get a language server that will perform that intelligence for you. LSP, the package, is the glue that you put into Sublime, and then you install a secondary package like LSP ClangD, for example, if you're doing C++ stuff, and that will give you that level of intelligence. In fact, that is powered by more often than not the same servers that Visual Studio Code uses for this similar thing. I think that the tools that, in that regard, that Sea Lion has, maybe even more advanced than Visual Studio has. I'm not sure, I haven't used it, but generally speaking, they're pretty good, so that might be a thing. Secondly, there's not a debugger in Sublime. There's a package that you can use to integrate with third-party packages for debugging, but as a tool that tries to be as language agnostic as possible, it doesn't have a debugger interface per se, because it would need to be something that's generic enough to work with absolutely any possible language that's available right now, or even any that might be added in the future, or hobby languages and the like. So there's no direct official support for that. As I said, there are packages for that. I believe it's called like debugger or something. In the same way that LSP is the language server protocol for interfacing your editor with an external language server that provides intelligence, the debug adapter protocol is the same thing, and there is a package for that would add a debugger. So that could be something that you could use. The last thing is that Sublime doesn't have any sort of capability for creating a build system for you, so if you're not already familiar with creating your own CMake files and the like, then you would need to learn how to do that before you could execute builds in Sublime, unless you already have the build systems made by an external tool. I don't think there's a CMake build that's built in. There's icons for it from a package I have installed, but there's not a build. There may be a package for it though, so we could probably check that out. There you go. You would probably need something like that to at least provide, here you go, our walls. If you want something CMake related, you probably want this package. So yeah, I would recommend this, probably LSP, maybe that. Those three things would probably get you most of the way there. And apart from that, the best advice that I could suggest is download Sublime. You could freely use it for as long as you need for testing purposes. It's going to ask you to remind you that if you're continuing to use it, you should purchase a license after every couple dozen saves or whatever. Install these packages and just sort of try it side by side for a couple of days and see if the experience is comparable, if it's, if it's making you faster, if it's making you better, because that should always be the ultimate thing. I know as a channel that is all about Sublime Text, I should probably be telling everybody that they should be using Sublime for absolutely everything all the time, no matter what. I don't do that. I don't tool shame. The best tool is the tool that allows you to get your work done with the fastest and the best result that you can create. And if that's something different, that's something different. But Sublime does have a lot of advantages in the way of speed and the like, which can really be very compelling, even if there's a couple of features that maybe aren't quite as full-featured as other things. Indeed, yeah. IDE always masks the heavier tasks. And that's sometimes when I see people mention that they just moved to Sublime Text as their IDE, I always try to chime in and say, just so you know, Sublime is not an IDE; it's a text editor, maybe with IDE aspirations. Because with the plugin host, there is a ton of stuff that you can add. For example, CMake Builder, as we can see right here, for configuring, building, and testing a CMake project from directly within Sublime Text. It's going to take a lot of the work out of that for you. That's not something that Sublime does out of the box, but someone has created that and enhanced it, right? Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned this before. I can't remember where, but for 20 years, Vim was my editor, I was using IntelliJ products, or JetBrains products rather, for specific things. Like when I was working on Java for a while, I was using IntelliJ. Because of that, when I did some web-related stuff, I used WebStorm. And of course I have C-Line, but I didn't use it very much. And when I was creating iOS applications, I used AppCode on the Mac, which is, I'm pointing over there as if you can see it, because it was vastly superior to Xcode. But I was having, it was very slow. It was very clogged up in the menus with items that I did not know or care what they did that was getting in my way. And there were a couple of bugs that were very irritating, and I went looking for an alternative, found Sublime, and within 24 hours I'd purchased a license. I wasn't even sure yet if I was going to keep using it, but I wanted to support the developers and what they were doing, because they came up with something that was cross-platform, extremely fast. I mean, coming from something written in Java, the idea that I can close this window and then just click this button and Sublime is back, started already in like the blink of an eye, as compared to more bloated applications that have to show you a splash screen while they slowly grind and load up all of their stuff. That stuff is incredibly compelling for getting work done. You use Pyrite yourself. Do you have it set up to be able to use plugin stuff, I guess, using the so that it knows about the Sublime API? Does it provide code intelligence for that sort of thing? Any ID would any ID would probably be using the LSP protocol mostly. I don't think JetBrains does, unless they changed how they do stuff in the last few years. They have an incredibly robust system that probably is the rival of LSP at this point. And again, it's been a long time since I've actually used them. But I know about that because the barrier to entry to creating a plugin for any sort of JetBrains tool is 3.5 miles high, because of the sheer complexity of what they have going on behind the scenes. But you can add items, I guess you're probably creating your own language server using their framework, but certainly Visual Studio Code and probably Visual Studio as well use LSP. There you go. I've never done it myself, but I know you can because somebody mentioned it to me after I played with it the last time. Using ML for code intelligence? Yeah, that would be a new thing for me. Here's a compare and contrast with how these sorts of things work. Okay, let's see if I have. Let's do this. I don't think I have this installed currently. I don't. This is a configuration file for the software that we write at work. It's a custom configuration, but it's heavily influenced by the configuration for X servers. It allows us to specify multiple programs, saying what the name of the program is that should be executed, what computer it should run on, and then the arguments that are provided to it. And in this particular case, these ones shouldn't be started, and the like. I decided I wanted to create syntax highlighting and such to be able to support being able to edit these files from inside my editor and having syntax highlighting and navigation. And I looked into how to do that with IntelliJ and their tools, and you have to install the community edition even if you have the regular edition, and then you have to install an SDK inside of the community edition, and then write tons and tons of classes support classes that are required just to get a basic hello world thing going, and then you start in with the work of trying to write Java code to parse stuff, like actually parsing the code into an AST, which makes it incredibly powerful for how it does stuff, but also a huge barrier to entry. But doing the same sort of thing in Sublime is much easier because of the way that it is implemented. It's not as powerful, but it is tons easier. Well, this could well be. I mean, as I like to say, I am 1,000 years old. When I started writing software back in the day, those sorts of tools weren't there, so I've just relying on them is not the correct word to say for that, but it's just not something that I've come to think of. But and I've mentioned this in the Discord, the thing about it that irritates me the most is the idea that I type this because I'm going to create a function, and then I don't have this part in here yet, or I type the name of a variable because I'm about to create one, but I just want to put the call point in first, and the editor's automatically on me like, hey, stupid, did you know that this code is broken? Or you haven't typed this character yet, and the entire file flashes red to let you know that the file is broken. And I always want to say, chillax, man. Wait until I'm finished typing, then tell me what I did wrong. And I find all of those, those indicators popping in all the time incredibly invasive. I didn't like it in IntelliJ either, which does the exact same sort of thing, but there wasn't an option to turn it off there. But what can I say? The other aspect of that is this, and maybe hello Ben, maybe Ben can relate to this as well. But if you work in a constrained set of code bases, then you generally already know 90% of the information that the code intelligence is trying to tell you anyway. When I'm working on the software that uses the configuration file that I just specified, I don't need the code intelligence to tell me what file something is in, because I already know, because I've been working in that code for a long time, and I know what methods are available, and I'm 99% sure what arguments are supposed to be passed to them as well. So very rarely would code intelligence there actually help me in any meaningful way, because I already have that deep understanding of the code myself. The only time it would really be of benefit to me is if I started working on a brand new code base and I wasn't familiar with it yet, and in that case I don't want the tool to tell me that the methods that are available on this are these 15 things. I want to have to go and look into the code to see that, because that's how I'm going to get the familiarity with the code base to actually know how it works. Which I know is it's like I say, I'm probably one of the few people that think that way, but that's just sort of how I tend to work due to long habit. How are things going today, Ben? We're discussing LSP and code intelligence and the like, and GitHub Copilot, which is anyone familiar with Travesty Media? Because for a long time, the only thing that I saw about Copilot was articles about how it's, maybe cool, but potentially damaging from a copyright perspective. And is it fair that it's using code without any sort of mention of it? So it's using the hard work of developers to populate stuff. Is it ethical to train the model and all those sorts of things? But I never heard anybody really say anything any good about it per se, until I noticed there was a video by Travesty Media where he's a very huge YouTube streamer, or YouTube, well, I think he streams too, but video creator that did a video about how super cool it is for getting your work done. And that was like the first thing that I'd ever seen that talked about it in a popular light. Yeah. Now I'm trying to think. The very first IDEs proper that I used were for Turbo Pascal 3 and then Turbo Pascal 4 and Turbo C. And they were editors, but they did not have any sort of code intelligence at all that I'm aware of. Not that I think of anyway. If they did, I probably would be more familiar with it, but I think it was just about the exciting thing about using later versions of the Borland tools and their enhanced text IDE was that syntax highlighting was a thing, because I don't think it was a thing in Turbo Pascal 3. I'd only believe Copilot if you actually build something production grade and Copilot maintains it. Yeah. I didn't get to watch the whole thing. I got called away to do something else, and then I think the window got closed on me, so I lost my progress on it. But it seems like a foreign thing for me, in the same sort of realm as LSP code intelligence type stuff. I think the most code intelligence that I need most of the time is being reminded about the names of things in case I've forgotten, and figuring out where they are, and syntax highlighting as a whole. But apart from that, I want to have the intelligence for the code that I'm working on in my head. I don't want the tool to try and guide me to it. I think that leads you to lean too heavily on the quick solution. And I've also, pointed that sort of stuff out in the past. I think the issue of, if you always let a tool do the work for you and you never look into it yourself, then when you don't have the tool, you have a hard time doing the work. You're not familiar with the stuff as much if you had found it other ways. Yeah, and I do use auto completion, but not to the level that LSP uses it, right? Like this sort of thing. And in this regard, the changes that have made to Sublime Text 4, to be smart enough to know that the name parse is used as a function and has been provided arguments such that when it populates it in, it knows it should not only add the parentheses, but it should put the cursor inside, is extra cool. That really kicks it up a notch for me. But yeah, it's one of those balance things, because on the balance of the autocomplete helping you remember things and complete things versus the autocomplete completely holding your hand and allowing you to basically try to browse the documentation of the entire code base. My balance tips more towards the one side than the other, personally. Yeah. Hello, Matthias. Yeah, and Java, I mentioned just earlier in this stream, if Java is the one thing where I would definitely use an IDE for that, just because the minutia of making sure that every file is in an appropriate place and all of that stuff that's associated with that, and the class has to have the same name as the file, and the file has to have the same structure as all of the places that are importing it, and there have to be the empty directories and all of that stuff, and class paths and the like. That's really not something that I want to deal with. I would definitely use an IDE, as I said, to at a minimum set up some sort of build, and then maybe I would use Sublime for editing and that to build, and then jump into the IDE for some other file generation related things. Yeah. I guess the only thing that's not super awesome about the current Sublime Text 4 autocomplete, in the perspective of some, is that its ability to just cycle through completions without populating the panel is no longer present, which is never something that I utilized except for in a video when I was talking about how you could do it. So I don't really miss that particular thing. I have a similar worry, Rockin' Games. I also have a similar worry, and I'm gonna put this entirely in the realm of grumpy old man, right? Because I've been developing software for 37 years, so way back in the day. So I'm a grumpy old man, and kids can't get off my lawn. But not only am I kind of worried about how if the tool does most of the work for you, for knowing that sort of stuff, it stops you from having a deeper understanding of what it is that you're doing, which is kind of worrisome. But also reliance on something like Node.js and packages that are available for it, because it allows you to very quickly prototype something out and scaffold code out of existing things, lets you come up with a piece of workable software a lot faster. But there are also severe performance constraints that surround doing it that way. And then you have to start getting into other more advanced technologies to try to bring back the speed that you could have had if you had taken your time and used a different set of languages. I'm kind of worried about that too, right? Because now that like Moore's law is no longer a thing, and the speed that computers go is sort of going down a little bit. The idea that on my first IBM XT, in order to do anything that was of any reasonable speed, sometimes you had to drop to assembly language because the compiler couldn't generate robust enough code to get you the raw speed that you needed. And now we have programs that have scripting languages written in scripting languages, running in a virtual environment, running inside a virtualized environment, inside of another virtualized environment, running an application. The levels of abstraction there seem kind of worrisome at times. I don't know, from a few days I really like reading the preferences file. Yeah, that's another thing, right? That's sort of a common complaint in Sublime, that the configuration system is hard to use. But seeing a list of all of the settings and being able to just scan through them, I'm doing something with the tab key. Oh, look, here's tab size, translating tabs to spaces, using tab stops. I found all of these things pretty easily. Software that is more complicated in that regard, and IntelliJ definitely falls into that category. Whenever your preferences page needs to be a tree of pages in order to try to associate everything, and you have to put a search inside of your preferences dialog to help people find the preference they need, that seems like an awful lot of complication. And I don't know, maybe I'm biased, but I find Sublime's mechanism for files and the hierarchy that they use much more powerful and elegant. Being able to specify default settings, global settings, settings that are specific to a project, specific to a particular type of file, particular to this exact tab, which is not something that a lot of things can do. Again, that's just me. Hang on for just 1 second here. I'm going to I gotta close this window real quick because it is getting very smoky in here right now, and air quality is going to suffer as a result. No, that's probably not open right now. That's probably cool. Now, yeah, Oh, that's another thing. People are sort of unhappy about there not being a toolbar in Sublime. I've never really been a fan of those in the general case for that very reason. Plus, more often than not, it requires you to, use your mouse to do a thing. I know, right? Now, I think people have mentioned the idea that surely you could come up with something that just dynamically displays all settings that exist in all preferences files everywhere. But I don't think that's as easy as people make it out to. I mean, the whole idea that settings in Sublime are very fluid in a lot of different ways because you can just add your own really makes that a lot more complicated. And then you have to start creating a file that goes alongside of your settings to tell people what the settings actually are, and you start losing the elegance of the whole operation. I've never been a fan of that. I actually have that installed. Sacrilege in 3, 2, 1. Oh, no, I don't have it installed anymore. I did have it installed for a bit. I had to help somebody with a thing, but that I sort of encountered that. It was actually counterintuitive to me too that when I actually found the settings, they weren't JSON-related things. And I had a hard time actually finding the setting that I needed to tweak. I'm not even entirely sure that I ever actually did without actually looking at the file. Atom also uses a JSON file, doesn't it? It doesn't have some sort of GUI editor, as I recall. Well, we're talking sacrilege here if we're going against, people that we know that are in the Sublime Text Discord that are writing hard for this idea. But you would have to create a JSON schema for your settings that describe all of the settings and all of their structure and all of their layout in order to have the UI be able to do something like that. And such a UI is not that easy to create at the best of times. And yeah, if there's just a list of settings, that's one thing. But when there's a conglomeration of settings, which there is, as Ben points out, for draw white space, there's a variety of these. Select, all of the different items that can be used in this. Like, look, in this particular resolution, the documentation for how this setting works doesn't all fit on the screen at one time because there's so many things that you can do. That would be a lot of stuff. And there was something else. Indent guides, similar, not quite as bad, but still not great. What do you do if you decided you wanted to augment something that had existing settings and you had a plugin and you were going to, take these settings are a bad example of this, but from another place, and actually want to have a different setting for that you control via a plugin that you created that does something special in a particular case, then it gets even more complicated still. So I'm not seeing it myself. As you say, more power to anybody that comes up with a way to do it. If Sublime had a preferences situation like that, I hope that it would be something that you could opt out of, or at least the files would still exist as they do here, because I very frequently just use this to look at the settings that I want instead of using the menu items, because I don't necessarily need to see both of those things. Similar, the idea of editors like Code and the like that have that big panel that pops up that are the remind you of stuff that you last did and show you articles from web pages and stuff. And the first thing that I always do is unclick the show this at startup button, because I never need to see anything like that. I go into my code editing tools to write code. I don't go into my code editing tools to read blog entries from the developer and the like. Yeah, is that something that Sublime HQ would be willing to add to the system by default? Just out of curiosity. Hang on one second, guys. I think the patio door is open and we're drawing smoke in that way. I want to go and make sure that that's closed too, so that we don't smoke the house out. I'll be back in just one moment. Oh, sorry about that. I do not want to freak out the dog or anybody in the building by having the smoke alarms go off. Hopefully that's not something that could actually happen. And I'm starting to get worried about, I thought they had that fire under control, but it's been going on for a while and the smoke is just starting to come now. So this is sort of a scary thing. But, ooh, it's in the cards. That's exciting. For those that might not know this, the ability to edit the current theme and edit the current color scheme in a way that it opens the theme or color scheme on the left and a file for you on the right is something that started in package dev, but now there is one of those that is built in as well for doing the exact same thing, which is incredibly handy. I find primarily, my use case is slightly different, for being able to describe to people how you might customize your color scheme, because it's enough to say, choose customize color scheme, now add a rule on the right to make your booleans glow green and red, depending on whether they are true and false, and otherwise do other stuff, as opposed to having to provide instructions like, you need to know what your color scheme file is, so look in your preferences, and then if it's a TM theme file, then you want to still use Sublime Color Scheme anyway, and then you need to create a file in your user package with that name. Make sure you use preferences, browse packages, that'll tell you where the user folder is. It has to be a JSON formatted file. Make sure you use the extension. Now you have that, here's the stuff you put into it. It's so much nicer to be able to say customize color scheme, add this rule, and you're good to go. So it would be totally cool. I mean, I'd still have, unless you're also going to enhance color syntax highlighting for all of the internal things in the same way that package dev does. Package dev is still very much needed, and I'm not sure if that would be in the cards, but having preferences autocomplete like that, I think would be a huge help to a lot of people as well. Particularly if it also shows you the tooltip for that, which this one does, right? For anything that is actually a valid setting. Usually, yeah. Tells you the default, tells you what you can put in there. Way cool. Exciting that that's in the cards. That and the new update dialog box. I'm really liking, and I'm sure I'm not the only one to say this, the direction that the stuff in Sublime has been going in Sublime 4. So many cool new things added, more things coming in. Even, as we say, simple quality of life improvements like having new files have a different color and deleted files have a different color, so it's very easy to tell right off the bat that that is what's going on there. That is like some cool action. It's the little things that really, kick stuff up. I was using that quite a bit the other day. The topic that I had, for a video, in case we couldn't come up with any questions or cool conversations, which we've been having all night, which is absolutely awesome, is this scratch buffer plugin. And I know that Ashwin and I come up with some ideas for what other things that this could do. I think the main thing that I would like to do to this before we try to release it would be to assume that input handlers are just always available now. I don't think we need to deal with older versions of Sublime at this point and use some of the new APIs. Let's check a thing here. Hidden color scheme. The word hidden doesn't appear in here anywhere, does it? No. That's cool. Yeah, I know. This is a discussion that we were actually having at work and with my wife as well, just the other day. The idea of quality of life improvements in things, because at work we have a couple of production systems. One that my coworker and I work on that provides the data, and another one that takes the data that we provide, processes it into various different things, generates reports and the like. And from our side, we do a lot of quality of life improvements both for ourselves and for people that are actually using us. So for example, if someone was to ask us a question and it took a bunch of wrangling to find the appropriate file or data to be able to look at what it was that they were asking to be able to answer their question, then we would totally spend a few days, maybe even a week, working on a quality of life change on our end that makes that easier to do. Because if you're going to be doing something a lot, why not make it easier? And by the same token, if people are asking us those questions, maybe there's some changes we can make on the other end of things so that they don't have to ask those questions. Like, people were constantly having problems adding holidays. So based on problems that they were having, we were able to modify various tools and add in extra things so that they just never have those problems because things are done for them. And the other side of that equation is when you don't want to take the time to do that because it seems like it's too much work, and then you're just spending a ton of time doing the same thing over and over again. I like to say, and I've been quoted as this in a Twitch clip, developers be lazy. If there's work to be done, we will get that work done. But if there's a way to cut that work out, then we're usually all about finding the ways to do that. And that's just one kind of quality of life, right? The stuff that we were talking about here is just visual changes, which on the face of it, you would think doesn't really make that much of a difference, right? But being able to tell that there are some tabs over there that are new versus files that I haven't quite saved yet is like a real time-saving thing in a way that you might not even think about, and probably fairly easy to add. Now I have to wonder if we can't have colored banners for all of the different types of things, so that if a file is tracked by Git and it has changes that have been staged but not committed, that it could be have a little purple shade on the top. That's probably taking things a little bit too far. It kind of hurt me a little bit, but someone recently asked on YouTube how to modify this button for closing so that it is still gray like it is here instead of green. So I provided instructions for how to find the appropriate theme rule and modify it, but I really wanted to be like, but why don't you want it to be green? It's so cool. But as we say, no tool shaming. If that's something that gets in the way, not something that you like, one of the great features of Sublime is being able to customize it to exactly the way that you want it to work. Oh man. I think normally I would go till about 10, but it is like extra smoky in here, and talking is really starting to make my throat a little bit raw. I think we might cut this stream a little bit short here, unless anybody else has any questions. We should be back next Tuesday, though. There's been a sort of an on again, off again. I've been helping a friend with some stuff, and it tends to fall on a Tuesday. And when that happens, there's not a stream scheduled, because it would either be very late or very short, depending on the timing of things. And I don't want to do that to people. But as far as I know, no one's contacted me about needing help this coming Tuesday. So we will be back to answer more questions then. But yeah, I think I'm going to call it here, because it's really starting to bother my throat here a little bit. And hopefully being able to talk, maybe wearing a mask might actually help a little bit. 8-hour power outage. Oh, rough. That happens to us on a very irregular basis. We get told about it ahead of time because they need to clean the power vault, but entirely uncool. I feel for you on that one. But oh my goodness, how's the pupper doing? I see you down there, buddy. Yeah, we're gonna jump out of here now. We will be back, and I will also be live on Twitch tomorrow and Friday, same time slot as here. If you have notifications on Twitch, if you follow me on Twitch, then you'll know when I'm going live. And also, there's a notification in my Discord as well that triggers when I go live. I do regular development work in those streams, but if you have questions about Sublime Text, much like tonight, all about that stuff there as well. Thanks to everybody who showed up. I hope you all have a great evening or day, although power outages notwithstanding. We'll see you next week. I hope you all have, for that reason, a sublime week. Have a good night, everybody.